So glad you're taking some time to join us for this webinar, which I have to say, I have been really excited about. We have an incredible panel, and I'm going to do my opening routine and then get out of the way here. Just a quick note that the Q&A function is enabled. Our chat feature is disabled. So if you have a question for any of us, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom. We have reserved some time at the end. Boy, I hope we get to do that because these folks have a ton of wisdom to share. And I'm thrilled to open today up. I'm Jay Younger, President and CEO of McKinley Advisors. The focus of our session today is on balance. It's how do you meet the moment with near-term opportunities while also preserving your areas of excellence that are more evergreen in nature. It's something that CEOs talk about all the time. And again, thrilled to bring this remarkable panel to you. I'll let them introduce themselves. We're going to go alphabetical by first name, which means Christy, you are first in line. And let me first say congratulations on your award that we'll get later this week at the gala in Chicago. So glad that you could join us.
Thank you, Jay. Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Tarantino Dean. I am the CEO of the Institute of Food Technologists. We are based in Chicago, and I have been with IFT for 10 years.
Awesome. Deborah.
Hi, everybody. And congratulations again to Christy. I am Deborah Bowen. I am the President and CEO of the American College of Healthcare Executives. We are also based in Chicago, and we are a professional society of about 50,000 healthcare leaders.
Thank you, Deborah. Sheriff.
Hi there, I'm Sheriff Kermit, President and CEO of PCMA, and also based in Chicago. And we are a global organization that spans just every continent.
Yeah, we didn't intentionally go 3 for 3 from Chicago, but Chicago is certainly well represented here. Again, huge thanks to all of you for joining. We're going to start on the first topic, which is about finding an enduring focus. I know most associations, all of yours, continue to use multi-year planning, and it's been a central component of our discipline in the association sector, certainly for as long as I've been in it. So kind of as we get off the ground here, talking about finding focus and establishing what those evergreen priorities are, Sheriff, in our preparation for this, I was really taken with the journey that you've been on around 2030 vision, and thought we'd start there with some of the insights that you've gleaned in your process about how to get it right, how to land on priorities that can unify the organization, give you the runway that you need, and set up a kind of a durable framework. So if we could start with you, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Pick on me first, why don't you?
Yeah. We're going inverse now of the alpha order.
Well, in today's world, I do believe that people are very attracted to purpose-driven organizations. And if I would start there, I felt that when I became the CEO of PCMA, our purpose was not clearly outlined and clearly defined. That would really allow our members, our audience, to sort of galvanize and get behind. And PCMA is an organization that is in lifelong learning around events, and membership is not mandatory. So your purpose has to be very clear, and it has to be very people have to be wanting to see themselves as a part of that. And that was that's where we started. We came up with a purpose of using business events to drive economic and social outcomes. And that was for the individual, the organization, and the community that they reside in. And that really resonated with our members, our audience in general, and allowed people to get behind us where we weren't just holding an event to raise money or just holding an event for event's sake. And so we started there. But with that, we took the step further and developed a 2030 vision, which we did actually just prior to the pandemic, and then slightly revised it after the pandemic to really take our community on where we were going to 2030, where we wanted to be in 2030, where we saw ourselves, and how we're going to measure success. And really outlining that very clearly and transparently to the membership allowed them to see themselves being a part of it, and allowed themselves to show how they could help PCMA get to 2030 faster.
That's great. Just one quick follow-up that ties together a couple of the points that you made. I was kind of taken in the purpose statement that you've included economic and social outcomes. And then as you think about measurement, which is always a tricky part of strategy, particularly when you start to think about higher order purpose and mission. How have you been thinking about measuring that economic and social progress that business events bring?
Yeah, so economic one is one that is easy if you were just measuring spend.
Right.
But Deborah's organization is a medical organization. Christy's organization is in food technologies. The spend shouldn't be, the economic output shouldn't just be about your direct spend in a city or what you spend on a meeting. It's the impact that Deborah's organization, Christy's organization, and my organization is having on other industries, whether it's increase in patient care, better patient care, whether it's research, whether it's in my case, whether it's the outcomes of our members are having, the impact that their meetings are having on society in general. That is still elusive to many of us, and we've got to do a better job of that. There is a organization called the Iceberg Project that's trying to get a handle on measuring impact. Now, the social impact is one that I think that we are getting our arms around, not fully, but we're getting arms around. And let me mention at least 2 or 3 of them. One is in any event, it doesn't matter which event you do, our footprint on our earth is fairly heavy. And so that's an environmental impact. And how can we mitigate our footprint or lessen our footprint? Because I believe the face-to-face events are critically important, not just for to further education and so forth, but it's good for our mental health. It's good for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think that it's where we truly connect. So face-to-face, I think, is really important. The other one that I could mention is about equity and inclusion. And specifically, I want to talk about equity and inclusion for women. And PCMA, when I became CEO, I launched a pledge, a CEO pledge. And the pledge was getting CEOs around the world to sign on to ensure that women were not just being hired, because this industry is a lot of women, not that they were just being hired, but they were treating equitably, they were included, and they were actually having C-suite jobs. And equity was not just around pay, but in everything else is what it's meant. Where I missed the boat at the beginning was to put measurements of how we would measure the companies that signed on. Since then, I've done that. And what we are doing is we're doing a study every 2 years to see how these organizations that have signed on, we've got approximately 200 CEOs that have signed on around the world, to see how they're moving the needle about equity for women. And you could go down that line for, anything else, whether it's race relations, all that kind of stuff. But I really felt strongly that we started with equity for women. The one thing I would like to see more equity for is people with disabilities or unique abilities. And I believe our society is still lagging in that.
Sure, thank you very much. Inspiring stuff. Deborah, Christy, what would you react to there that Sheriff offered, either in terms of impact or measurement or finding the focus that you need in your organizations?
Well, first of all, if I might just jump in, because I know Christy has something more valuable to say, I'm sure, but I'll just start. First of all, I'm struck by how similar our organizations are, even though you're in economic and social impact of meetings and events experiences, and I'm in the leadership business. But what you talked about is, in essence, what we're about as well, that, leadership is not just, having a cool job or having a responsible job. It's about the impact you have, and in our world, how you are advancing health. And you need a diverse workforce. You need everybody in at the table, because you can't solve the problems of patient disparities or patient outcomes or anything else, disabilities, wherever the inequities are. You cannot solve them if you don't have good people at the table. So for us, I'm just kind of dovetailing on this measurement piece, because I think it's an interesting one. For us, we can't necessarily measure leadership's impact to those things, but we can measure who's in the mix, and tell, what are the stories that are being told about how those individuals, be they women, be they any other dimension of diverse people, are making an impact. I think it's a very interesting question, how similar we all are. The other thing I would just say is, that you ultimately have to have good ways to measure all the sort of environmental, society, and governance aspects. I think that's an up-and-coming area for associations. Healthcare happens to be one of the 8th largest contributors to climate change and all the other issues. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more sensitivity to a lot of those issues.
Yeah, I would agree. Similarly, in food is production of food has a tremendous environmental impact, but also as we look at who we want to be as an organization moving forward. And I will say, a lot of the work we've done the last several years was inspired by the work that Sheriff had done. When I saw how they had laid out that vision and really clearly articulated who they wanted to be. And I think for an organization like IFT, whose members are really diverse in what they do in the food system. So we have academic researchers, we have government regulators, we have government researchers, and then we have product developers, food safety specialists, packaging specialists, nutritionists, all involved in the food system within IFT. And it's hard to serve all of those. I many times say I liken us to the American Medical Association of Food, and that there is a specialty society that can serve just about any of our members in some given way. And so for us, it's how do we do a better job of really understanding where our right to win is, and being much more intentionally focused on communicating that, instead of trying to make everybody in their own facet of the food system happy. I'm not going to say that we're there, but we've been moving on this direction of doing a lot of member research, and really we're at the intersection of all of those things. So food is not a single disciplinary type of output. Safe food, you need to have someone who understands safety, logistics, supply chain, packaging, all of those things. What we bring to it is the intersection of solving those problems. If we look at sustainability, healthy food, all the producing food with less resources, less land for a growing population, we're real focused on what our mission and vision is, which is better food for a growing population. I'm distilling that down for the benefit of this. Then we need all of those voices and all of that research and all of those minds at the table, not just a food scientist in product development. When we're thinking much broader about the whole system, how do we look at social sciences? There's a lot of factors going into how people eat, what their access to food is. And so I think being able to articulate that impact of if we all come together, how we can have even greater impact in solving these challenges is something that we've been focused on. And then how do we distill down where we are at that intersection and stop trying to be all things to all people, which is challenging.
No kidding. And Christy, again, in the preparation, you mentioned one of the tools that you're, I think it's fair to say, just kind of getting started with, and it had a name that really resonated with me, the trade-off matrix. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've been on this journey, I would say, over the last 4 years to really try to hone in on really who we are and who we want to be, while respecting the history of the organization, but recognizing we can't do what we've always done. The pandemic really provided a lot of opportunity for us to move a lot of things forward more quickly, quite honestly, than if it hadn't happened. But over the last year, we've been doing work with our board and our senior staff to develop what is called a trade-off matrix, where we're deciding what we're no longer going to do. So it's 4 boxes: what we're going to eliminate, what we're going to decrease in terms of programs and resources, what we're going to create, and what we're going to increase. So, and recognizing this is not a turn the faucet on or off, that we needed to develop a multi-year plan to phase out some programs that could be very popular with a small group of members, a lot of change management, given we've already undergone so much change, but it's now really our roadmap. So, and provides us on the staff with a tool to say, and I've already done it. The board just approved it in March, and we've had ideas come up, and I say, okay, that's a good idea, but what would come off the matrix in order to add this in as a new program? Like, you have to make some value choices. And one of the things we keep talking about, I've been saying it for years, but a consultant we worked with said it a little bit differently. You know, if you don't, and Deborah will appreciate this, it was Tom Dolan, her former boss, said to me,
a consultant,
said to
Tom
me,
Dolan.
he wasn't our consultant, but he said to me probably 10, 15 years ago, Christy, if you're not, I won't use his exact language, making some of your members, 20% of your members mad, you're not doing enough to move the organization forward. And I've been saying that. And so this consultant said to our board, if you're not upsetting someone, you don't have a strategy. And I think that's really hard for us in associations when we have really long-term members who've given. In my case, you can join as a student. I have people who are actively involved that have been members for 60 and 65, 70 years, and I'm not exaggerating. And so it's really challenging at times to move them along, or either accept that they're just not going to be happy. That's a broad brush, but we have to recognize that we're going to upset some people for the good of the whole. And I think that's a real shift that we've made, and to be really disciplined. We've agreed to what our priorities are. And it doesn't mean that a new opportunity might displace something, but we at least have to have that conversation versus just adding it on.
I think that's a really good point. If I might add in there, one of the things we represent a lot of different kinds of constituencies as well, because almost everybody thinks they're in the leadership business, and even those who are not holding formal roles, they're inspired to want to be a leader. So, what I have found to be helpful in the glue of dissent, if you will, is a values discussion. Because when you talk about values, it seems there's a lot of agreement. It's more about how it gets manifest or how it gets executed. So I've been doing, not the trade-offs, although I'm going to steal that if you'll let me, but more almost the scenarios, if more of this, then less of that, because it strikes me that, we can't always deal in black and white. Things are sort of, good only in their discernment of what people really mean. So in any case, I've been doing the scenario planning, and that's been helpful. But again, I think it's more a matter of getting things off the list, and obviously using your plans as the glue year to year, because you simply cannot afford to turn on a dime in this day and age.
Well, I'm going to add a little bit to that, and I do think that dissent is really good and helpful. I do believe that regardless of the scenario that Christy outlined and Deborah commented on, I feel that dissent is what makes us even better. And it pushes us to even think of our own ideas. Why are they dissenting is what I want to know. Not because they like something because it was happening for years and years and years, but there's usually a reason. And sometimes that reason, actually, you can really get people on side because they dissented. And usually people that are dissenting are actually more passionate about your organization. And I worry about people that just are too quick to align and fall behind you. Because is the organization really being pushed to be as innovative as it needs to be with our future? The one thing we do is we add a year to our planning cycle every year. So every year, we add a year. So we're constantly revisiting our business plan. We're constantly revisiting 2030 vision that will move to 2031 and so forth. So that we're always adding a year. But I highly covet dissent because I think it makes us stronger.
Yeah. And we shouldn't be afraid of it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I would say through changes we made to our board, we actually have much more dissent because the board is much more diverse and comes from different aspects of the food system, different perspectives, and it has challenged our staff in a very different way. We have to come with much more of our A game than we did when we had a lot of like-minded people because they were elected by popular vote. You know, they were great boards. They were very supportive of the organization, but they didn't disagree as much as my board does today. And I do think that is very helpful.
Scholarship on this is pretty clear that it's the debate that actually leads to the best decisions. And I think we've all been in enough board meetings where you can tell that sometimes a disturbingly large majority is tuned out and not paying attention. Not that would ever happen on your boards, of course, but of course not. That's where you can run into trouble, right? You want people to come prepared, ready, actively involved, engage in the discussion, dissent if they have a different point of view, even sometimes if it's just to pressure test something, right? Sheriff looks like you.
Well, I think that dissent is not just nice to have. I think it's needed. However, that dissent, I mean, speaking of the boardroom is one thing. Speaking of the membership is a different thing. The dissent in the boardroom should happen, must happen. But when you leave that room, you all speak with one voice, and that is, or one message, because hopefully you've come to some kind of an agreement when you leave that room. So you've got direction. With your membership, I do believe that dissent is really a good thing, because the people that usually dissent with you are the ones that usually are more passionate. And you want to tap into that dissent because that can really help you. And I believe in this term, studying weak signals. And the way when we study weak signals, we really get an indication of where things are going. And so that dissenting voice can prove to be very valuable.
I think it also, sorry, Jay, and one more thing, and I'll let you move on. I also think it's because of the world we live in today, we have to do a better job communicating the why of change and how we have listened to our membership. I go back to what I said is the good of the whole. Sometimes we get really bogged down into the loudest voices and there are a lot of silent voices too, who aren't necessarily happy with the organization. And so it's balancing those two things. And I think really leveling up our communication, change management skills, because we have to change as organizations to stay relevant.
I think the other role we have as a tandem to that is bridging. You know, you kind of have to bridge people to which is basically the same thing as saying why, but you're kind of bringing them to another concept too, through their own rationale. And I think you can do that if done in the right way.
All three of you in the intro, kind of in the first few minutes, talked about the importance of connecting as to the impact that you're making, the why of the organization, its purpose. and that as a kind of an emotional tie for a reason to belong, a reason to participate, we know is, as important as the functional benefits of membership for many people, particularly folks who've been around for a long time. And, Christy, I would concur 100% that upping our game in communicating that why, that is, if there's something more important to getting it right in the next decade or two, let's get it up for some debate. But I'm with you, and I think the frustrating thing that we often see is that just a lack of awareness about that. Sometimes a skepticism, that the organization would be doing these good things. So just a plug for that. Studying the weak signals, is maybe a transition point here to talk a little bit about agility. And with a multi-year horizon, Sheriff adding a year every year to the plan. Deborah, I know you follow a similar routine in terms of your strategic planning cycle. And we're really in the crosshairs during the early days of the pandemic. I don't know if you've ever gotten out of them when your members really needed you in ways that they hadn't before. What can you bring forward from that experience around staying agile, meeting the needs of the membership as they emerge, balancing all that with your 24/7 mission around leadership? Have you had a chance, maybe you even haven't had a chance to reflect because you've continued to be so busy, but what can you bring out of that experience around how do you balance this need to adjust and remain agile when things like COVID happen?
Well, I think all of us were probably in similar situations. I mean, but we were in a business during COVID where right before COVID, we were probably an organization that delivered 90% of our face-to-face learning, in person. And so, it fundamentally changed everything, that we were about. And we're not an advocacy organization, so we don't have that. But we are a learning and networking and, inspiring healthcare leaders organization. So we had to turn on a dime. What's interesting about that, though, and I think we've infused that way of thinking, that urgency that we felt during COVID. I mean, there was just such a groundswell of we've got to get this information out there, because COVID didn't start in one place. It was it was a wave that continued through the country. So we were literally creating networks of support for our leaders to try and understand how to handle patients, and the protocols were changing extremely rapidly.
Yeah.
The downside of that, oddly, is that yes, we've infused and maintained that sense of urgency in terms of reinventing ourselves and reinventing our products and trying new things at our annual meetings and piloting more, et cetera, et cetera. But it's almost as if there's an expectation now that you will always turn on a dime. And I find that to be also a little interesting, because now I find, there's just a little bit more sensitivity to, well, you did it during COVID, I'm sure you can do it now. And so you get in this mentality of always pulling rabbits out of a hat. And if you're only always pulling rabbits out of a hat, that's all you have time to do. You don't have time for the longer range responding, et cetera. So I'm really trying to strike a balance with my board about being realistic about the environment, but also this kind of notion of balancing return on mission and return on investment. And we identify the strategic priorities every year, and they don't change every year because some of them take a little longer to put into play. But I don't think agility is an option anymore. It is a must-have. And I think people are expecting more than incremental change from all of us, which I think can be very healthy. I mean, just like dissent can be healthy, I think, thinking a little higher level about what can AI do for you and for the profession can be a very healthy thing. It just has to be balanced with realism, so you're investing in the staff and bringing the staff and the capacity and the execution along with that strategy.
Jay, I'm going to add to this comment because I find it very fascinating and interesting. I do believe that what COVID did was give a license to our members and our audience, as well as a license to our organization to act differently, to do things differently. And there's an expectation today that we need to be different in order to provide the resources, the value that we need. So when I look at things that we might do, I look at commerce, content, community, experience, and how people may want to consume those things, and how we would serve them up. Deborah, something that we are doing is that we've got a team that's really focused on innovation. I would guess to say that 99 things of what Microsoft, or 99 out of 100 that what Microsoft or Apple are putting out fail, but only 1% succeed. And associations need to think about how they're going to innovate and constantly be in that cycle, so that the entire organization is not. And so we do have to rethink our staffing, as in terms of do we have an innovation team in our organization that is piloting new things, that is not actually consuming the 90% of the staff.
Right.
I do think that us as associations need to get there, because no longer our competition is other associations or profit companies. Everybody else is taking a piece of our lunch, and we've got to be staying ahead of that.
Absolutely. So, Christy, I know one of the ways that you're trying to stay a step ahead is in that talent function, and I think you've had some good results with some investments you've made with subject matter expertise, bringing it from your profession, which historically had not been the pattern. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I would say we had food scientists on our staff, but perhaps not some who had recently been in the shoes of our members and several different functions within the food system or the food industry. And so when we were, I agree totally with what's been said about the pandemic and giving us the opportunity. For sure, we took every opportunity to look at how we were doing things, making change. And I saw the question in the chat, and it is hard to make some of that change because it's disrupting things. But the way it's always been. But one of the things that we did was recognize through some member research also that we didn't really know what the day-to-day lives of our members were, and that in order to better design programming, just-in-time, best-in-class resources, that we needed to have more scientific and real food system expertise on our staff. And we set out to build a team. I think now we have at least 10 people who've worked in the food space. And, that's always a tricky thing, because the transition isn't always easy for people to come from the field into the organization. I think we've done a really great job of it hasn't been great. Some people don't enjoy the pace or having to work with volunteer leaders and those things. But for the most part, I would say the team we have has really elevated the whole organization, because they can say that messaging is not going to resonate. You're talking your language, you're not talking the language of the members. And that may not even be their role at IFT. Their role is to head up our nutrition area, all of the research that we do or facilitate through our members, or government relations, or those types of things. But they also bring that viewpoint to the organization. And I think it's really elevated the relevance of our organization, and we've really leaned into it, these last 3 years, I would say.
And I would imagine speed to market, right?
Yeah.
We joked a little bit about, we can send something to a committee and maybe expect a response in several weeks, maybe, or, we've got somebody right here who can get things to a great place very quickly.
I'll give you a really great example that it's been transformational for us. Our members have always been upset for years, before I even joined IFT, about the amount of misinformation related to food.
Yeah.
You know, bloggers and whatnot who make claims. And we used a number of very good member experts to comment. But having all of these, we have a nutrition expert, a food safety expert, we have a former product developer, and they can translate. And we paired that with some new in-house public relations staff. And our media mentions now, we have reporters from CBS News and Wall Street Journal and Forbes coming to our event this year. And it's been incredible, the transformation. And I think we'll have tripled the media mentions in the first 3 quarters of this year to what we would have had in previous years. Just by having, when NBC News calls, which it's happened, one of our staff can get on the phone versus us going out and having to find somebody, the right person, make sure they're available. We can respond to that. And then as an issue's arisen, like certain food additives being banned in California, we were able to pull up a webinar days later with some experts, and it had, I think, almost 400% better attendance than our average webinar, because it was very staff driven. They knew the experts in the field, and we could get it done much faster than when we were relying only on volunteers. We still bring in the volunteers as we need, but we can do all the heavy lift. So It's made a huge impact for us.
Yeah, I think it's worth, there is a question in the chat about how do we deal with all the competition that Sheriff mentioned, other associations, trade publications. How do we deal with a competitive environment that continues to grow seemingly day after day? And I mentioned speed to market. That's one of, I would say, my suggestions is that you have to think about that, because a great idea that, and again, I don't mean to be overly harsh on our beloved committee structure in the association sector, but if you send something out to pasture for a year, 18 months to study it, chances are the market's already going to be seeded. What other suggestions do you all have about particularly a competitive environment and how you're dealing with it in this day?
I would tell you how we do, and I don't know how relevant it is, but we, for the first time in our history, we actually sold out our annual meeting 3 weeks early. And the way we did that, well, we're a leadership organization, right? So what would people expect to find outside of really great content? I mean, our content has been highly rated for years, but people don't necessarily, come to conferences to just hear only the latest on AI. The source and credibility of who's providing that message is important. So we basically have all the top leaders in healthcare come to our meeting now, and we've gotten to the point where they're self-policing each other. Oh, I saw Wright was there. I want to be there. And now we've got people calling us asking to speak. People who don't usually speak at conferences. And it's simply because of the environment that we have created. And it wasn't because we necessarily created a new product, but we leveraged our brand to really extend our reach and impact. So I think sometimes people don't think big enough. It's like we have a lot of sometimes same old thinking when we're putting on our conferences and things like that. This is Sheriff's arena, so I don't want to get too far in. He can correct me, but so elevating that in ways and really understanding who people want to hear from. It's a simple idea, but it's worked for us.
It's great.
I don't believe always a great physician makes a great hospital administrator. And so when you speak about leadership for boards, I do think in the world that we live in, when it comes to competition, you have to make sure that we have the skill set, the type of leaders that we need on the board that will ensure agility in the organization. And we really have to curate our boards better. So that's said about the board, but we have to also think about the same about our teams. And the reality is that in some organizations, and I'm not critical of this, you got people who are there for 40 years. There's nothing wrong with that. And if they are actually continuing to upgrade their skills. And I applaud that actually, if they're continuing to be upgrading their skills. But we do need new skill sets in our organization to be able to respond quicker. Now, I want to address your competition head on. The reality is that we are our own worst enemy when it comes to competition, because we are not building our organization to be agile, to be innovative, and to be stepping in front of when you think of for-profit companies, they've got one motive, and they are working on that, and that's what they're taking products out to market as quickly as possible, doing what they've got to do. So of course there's competition. I actually applaud and highly appreciate competition because it makes me better at my game. It means that I have to up my game. So competition is a good thing. I do not spend a minute of my time worrying about my competition. I spend all my time laserly focused on doing what we do and excel at doing what we do. And are we doing that? And if we do that, and we're still not whatever, then we're actually maybe not really listening to our membership and our audience.
I agree 100%, because if we're not focused on our own right to win, then of course we're going to get too wrapped up in what the competition is doing. And so I agree with Sheriff 100%. It's so important. And doing that talent assessment and investing in your own team so that, and finding the people who want to upskill, and as the pandemic did give us some opportunities, there's a lot of transition. We lost some really good staff to better hire more senior roles that we couldn't provide them. However, it gave us a chance when they left to think about, is that the same profile we still need? And we think about that quite a bit. I think the board comment you made, Sheriff, I could not agree more. We've worked on that very hard, changing from a popular election to a slate during the pandemic. And the conversations at the board level are very different because we have a mix now of C-suite and big food companies, but also academic leaders and government leaders, and some young professionals as well. But it's very curated as a group, and very focused on, we spend a lot of time as a board every year. Okay, what skill set and experience is missing from this board that we need to ensure we have in the next class? And it's never the same, oh, replace this with the same thing we had. It's been very different each year. And it's really fun to be a CEO where I'm learning all the time from these folks in very large organizations who are challenging us, but also appreciate what we do on our side of the partnership as well.
Yeah.
That is an asset, right? I'm sorry, Deborah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, go ahead.
No, agree. That's all.
That is a huge asset to have that kind of leadership quotient in your board. And Christy, I know you have been working extremely hard on that, and probably feel good that you're having some good results there. In that same category of assets and resources, I'll open this up to any of you to start. How do you think about resourcing your strategic priorities? Is it in line with anything else that you're doing? Do you set it off to the side of the budget? Do you have a special fund? Have you tried all of these things? When it comes to resourcing, how do you consider, again, finding that balance between long-term evergreen things that you're always going to be investing in and some of the opportunistic work that you need to do?
We actually are in our budgeting process right now. And so
fun. I'm sure you're having them all.
Yeah. With this new trade-off matrix, we're actually every team final meeting to where we reviewed their budget and light of the whole were conversations around those priorities and where the staff time will be allocated. And we haven't gotten that far in our process yet, but we're going to demonstrate to the board what amount of resources are going towards the increase and create bucket. What do we need to transition out or decrease some of those programs? And what that might look like over a 3-year period. And then again, it'll be rolling, I'm sure. but really focus on that versus just kind of doing what we've always done. We have also carved out some staff for some innovation projects and some funds. So we have an innovation amount that we can spend up to so much a year, but we've also been more intentional at bigger dollar investments, a little more high risk, high reward type things. We've got a couple of those projects going right now where we've said we've done very well as an organization for 85 years. It's time to really start to invest and bring in whatever resource we need, whether it's staff or otherwise, to focus on that, because you can't have them running a program that's existing and time consuming and over on the side work on big new things. So we've been very focused in that way the last few years as well.
We spend some dedicated time after our strategy session. So every June board meeting is a strategy session, which Jay knows because he's facilitated some of them. But we spend a good portion too talking about resourcing, because obviously, they can, regardless of what they reinforce or reprioritize, it has to be well resourced. We do have something called vision funds, and vision funds are just a bucket that comes from basically, undesignated funds that every year we plan for, and we have spent even in the last couple of years, several $1 million on a technology investment. So I mean, it can be real money, and it can also help us get the resources we need to move faster, since we really can't necessarily always do everything with the current staff. Sometimes we need to go outside and jumpstart something with another type of partner, another type of company, another type of consultant, whatever the case may be. But it's also then becomes part of our budgeting process, which goes to the board after the strategy and the budget and the goals all align together toward the end of the year.
Yep.
With us, one of the things that we realized is that for us to move quickly, we could not do everything internally. We just didn't have the capabilities. We had, I guess, I would argue we had some capacity. I just don't believe that we had the capabilities. So we took a strategy of acquisition, joint ventures, and taking stakes in companies. It's not something that associations traditionally do, but we did it. And that sort of caught us a little bit off guard, because we didn't necessarily have the skills on hand to do mergers and acquisitions. And we had to learn really fast. But it allowed us to move a lot faster at the same time, because it brought in so much resources into the organization that we could move faster. Whether it was to acquire a product or to acquire talent or to acquire a new market, we were looking at all of it in that process. Now on that same vein, we are starting our planning in July, but we plan for 18 months at a time. And so we're going to make sure that this year is successful and plan to the end of next year. But we do have an innovation fund. We're not saying that fund is actually funded enough, but because of our acquisitions and so forth, every time we went into an acquisition, we went to the board knowing that it was a part of the plan. We just didn't know what the acquisition was going to be at the time. And they were totally on side, because it was a part of our strategy of how we're going to grow, or how we're going to develop new product capabilities in a quicker span. So we just didn't set aside that amount of money at the time. We went to the board, got the approval at the time.
Always good to have that alignment and that buy-in and that support. We've got just a few minutes left here, and there are a couple questions in the chat. Christy, I think you've been answering directly for somebody who's going through a leadership transition. Sounds like a doozy. Do you want to do you want to share just a
Yeah.
little bit about how you're seeing that opportunity? And for the rest of the panelists, this is somebody who has a very long-term CEO, 37 years, who is stepping out, and a lot of leadership change going on. And Christy, I know you've had some experience with that.
Yeah. So first of all, Michelle, I was just about to answer. I wasn't sure if you could see it publicly or not, but I think to your first questions about how do you stay sane going through all this change and all the challenges, I would say the people on this call and many others have helped me stay sane over the last several years, going through a lot of change, a lot of disruption in my organization. But having that peer network, we've all been through some form of it. And sometimes it's actually learning that your situation may not be as bad as someone else's when you talk to them. I know that sounds maybe a little cynical, but I have had that many times, you know, and just having those people who've been through it to help you talk through it. In terms of board transition, you know, I don't know if you could see it, Michelle, but I was saying, I'm happy to have a conversation around that, but our process change really started the day I started at IFT. It was not something that we turned the switch on overnight. We really started with the system we had, to be honest, and tried to improve that to the best of our ability until we had done everything we could. Which was looking at the interview process, which we do. We have a pretty rigorous application, an interview process with our committee to select. Even when we were doing elections, we did that. The outcome was always, though, that we didn't get a diverse group. And by diverse, it can mean the whole gamut of diversity, where they worked, what they looked like, where they were from, their scientific or business background. And so we got it as far as we could to that point. And what we knew, and I had the right board chair at the right time, was that coming out of the pandemic, having a very diverse board with leadership experience and an understanding of our membership as a whole, not just a select few, was going to be even more critical for the organization. And that was really what we built our proposal. And our members had to vote on this change. They passed it by 90%. Now, that doesn't mean there haven't been aftershocks of that as this board has started to make different changes that perhaps people don't like. But we're very intentional. We actually publish on our website what skills and experiences we're looking for each year in our class. We don't have that up just yet, but if you, in a couple of months, you can see it on our site. It's publicly available. For example, we're looking for, you know, members who have experience with food startups, or we want someone with a nutrition background, or we want someone with a supply chain background. We want, you know, academics, people from outside of North America, those kinds of things. We publish that right up front. And then, of course, our board is encouraged to nominate. All of our volunteer leaders are encouraged to nominate, or you can nominate yourself. We have not had a problem getting diverse candidates at all as we've started this new process. We've actually, because of the process, now have different types of candidates who believe they have a chance when they may not have before, because they weren't as well known across the less than 10% of our membership who actually voted. So I would say we have more candidates, more diverse candidates because of the new process than we had before, which makes it hard. Our committee has very challenging discussions because I think the pool is bigger and stronger in terms of the diversity than we had in the past. There are people who won't put themselves through that public election. We lost a lot of great people, especially international, who just weren't well known enough in the US to win.
I think it's among the reasons that model is so challenging, particularly as you're trying to upskill and really bring top talent onto your boards.
Yeah.
You know, putting them through some sort of election process with.
I mean, we have 4 new board members, and in one year we had 3 of the 4 all worked in the same area of the science. And then, I gotta remember, I'll never forget, I got an email criticizing that we had 3 board members who all worked in the same area. I was like, I don't get to vote,
Right.
so
Yeah,
I
it's not
can't
up to me.
control that. And so it's, I think it's a lot about messaging, and it's a lot about being transparent too, and how the process works.
As we often do, we pivot a little bit to governance as a central factor in success. Deborah, Sheriff, what capabilities, competencies, skills are you looking for your boards now? Are you looking for people with technology acumen, leadership acumen, something specific, or new or different?
Most of our we have a competency-based board process, and we use a nominating committee, so we don't have voting among the masses, which helps a lot. And I do have a very guiding hand, let's just say, in the selection of the board members. Our board is actually more diverse than our membership. But I think it's a combination of, strategic insight. I mean, we're looking for people to provide evidence of their leadership acumen, in a variety of settings. And of course, it's important, just like Christy noted, for people to have a variety of perspectives, because healthcare is very diversified. So we're looking for non-hospital people, just like we're looking for some of the core membership. But really, at the end of the day, it's about, do they understand what it means to be in a decision-making role, leadership, strategic insight, entrepreneurial spirit, all of those risk-taking behavior, all of those things that I think make for good governance, as well as teaming appropriately. We're not interested we're interested in, while we want people to disagree, we're still interested in having a collaborative environment.
Yeah, we have a governance committee that selects a nominating committee. And that nominating committee is they almost have to play a role of a headhunter to be very selective on who's going to be on that board. With respect to the skills that we're looking for and ever evolving, we are looking for people in mergers and acquisition, in finance, in AI, specifically generative AI, because PCMA acted as a VC to fund the AI startup. So we're looking for that. We're looking for people that are that have got really good acumen in building purpose-driven organizations. Nothing different really from what Deborah and Christy are talking about, but just looking at and we've got a whole matrix of skills and competencies that we think we would like on a board, and we update them every year or every other year based on the cycles, and just look at that clinically every year and see where we're lacking, where we have a gap, and how we can best fill that.
Yeah, I think what's common among all 3 of you is this recognition that leaving it to chance is probably not the way to go. And again, I know a lot of other association execs don't have that luxury because the policies and procedures that get the board there are outside of their remit, and you deal with who shows up, which is, on the face of it, something you'd have to wonder about, right? So
yeah, but Jay, I don't agree with that. I think that I wouldn't take a job if that's the case. I'm very clear about that. I do believe that if you're going to make an organization successful, boards, membership all have to evolve in a time. And the reality is that association executives, CEOs, really have to work collaboratively with their board. And so that relationship should be very, very strong. A board should be there to support the CEO, to ensure that things are getting done, and also hold them accountable. However, I do think this sort of really old-fashioned notion of how association boards were assembled needs to be thrown out the window. And understand that if they want to have a successful organization, which I know they want to, but they want to, sometimes boards want to hang on to some of the things that have been vestiges of the past. and you're not going to go into the future by doing that.
All right, so I think Sheriff has done a fabulous job of giving plenty of energy to the next time that we bring this group together. We're going to be talking about tearing down all those vestiges. How about that?
There you go.
I think we get a lot of interest. We are at time. I want to thank all three of you so profoundly for sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts from the three of you? Last words of wisdoms before we wrap it up here? We've done it.
Yeah.
Come on Thursday night if you're in Chicago as we celebrate Christie's.
There you
Yes. One more plug for
One more plug for Christy. Okay.
this
I'll
year's
do it.
Shapiro Award winner, Christy Tarantino Dean. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have
Awesome.
a ball celebrating. And to the rest of you who participated, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us. Please keep an eye out for future opportunities, including the, I'm kind of not kidding. We probably should have one on how you get past these legacy structures, which can be just the absolute, antithesis to everything we've been talking about today. So stay agile, stay cool if you're in most of the country, which is hot right now, and we'll see you all later. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.